Welcome. My name is Grace Shemaine, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Texas, and I will be the host of today's webinar. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We never support or oppose political parties or political candidates. Our mission is empowering voters and defending democracy. We know this is a critical election, and normal election processes are likely to be disrupted by the pandemic. The national elections are getting all the press, but Texas voters will have a long list of races for state, county, and local elections. These are the elections that may not get all the press, but are just as critically important due to the impact these positions have on the quality of life in our communities, our schools, our roads, the social services offices offered, policing, and how justice is served at the local level. Our panelists will present to you valuable information about these down-ballot positions. We encourage you to submit questions by using the Q&A button on your screens. Because we expect there to be many questions, we suggest you type yours in as soon as you think of it. We will be monitoring questions throughout the session and sorting them by topics. If we have time, we will answer the questions that are helpful to everyone, and we will provide a link to the Q&As and resources when we share the webinar with participants. You may also use chat for general communication among participants, but we ask that all comments show utmost respect to all panelists and participants. We also ask that participants limit any partisan remarks. Please do not campaign in the chat section. Before we begin, let's do a quick poll for all our participants other than the panelists. Please enter your answer in the poll that should pop up on your screen. Karen, can you post the poll? So the question is, who is on the webinar? An individual voter, a representative of an organization, a member of the league, or other? Just mark one of those and we will find out the results. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Karen, let's see what the results are. So there's 53% are individual voters, 7 are from an organization, and 22 are from the league, and 1 is other. I don't know what that other is. Maybe they could send me a message later. Thank you so much. Okay, Karen. All right, so what we're going to do is move. We really want to get to all these really important positions, and so we're going to move. I will quickly introduce the first speaker, who's going to be Sherry Greenberg, who is faculty at UT LBJ School of Public Affairs. She serves on numerous Austin boards and commissions. She has served as a senior advisor to Austin Mayor Steve Adler and was a Texas state representative from 1991 to 2001. Her teaching areas are finance, management and leadership, social policy, and information and technology policy. Sherry is going to cover municipal elections for us. So, Sherry.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. This is such an important election, and as was noted, it's a very long ballot. There is a lot on this ballot, so let's get right to it and talk about the city council and mayor. Austin has what is called a council manager form of city government, and so in 2012, there was a ballot measure, and the voters kept our form of government with the manager council, but did move to what is called our 10-1 system. Before that, all of the council members ran citywide. We didn't have specific districts. But with 10-1 in 2014, what we had is a situation where you have 10 council members who run from specific geographic districts, and then the mayor continues to run citywide, as we have always seen here. But with the council manager form of government, the mayor presides over the city council and has just a single vote as the other members of the city council do, but he does preside. But with the council manager form of city government, the mayor and council are the policy arm of our city government. They devise policy. The city manager is actually the CEO who implements policy and who hires and fires, the staff. So for instance, the chief of police in Austin is hired by the city manager, not the mayor and council. The only significant city in Texas that deviates from this is Houston. Houston does have what's called the strong mayor form of government, where Sylvester Turner, who is the mayor, is also the CEO, but not in Austin. So I wanted to set that stage for us, what the form of governance is that we have for our city of Austin, and also the fact that it did change. In fact, January 29th, 2015 was our first city council meeting with the 10-1 being elected from the council members being elected from those districts. What does this mean for us? Well, we have several of these council seats that are up this time. They are staggered, so not all of the council members run at the same time, and the mayor is not up for re-election in this round, but several of the council members are. Why is this important to you? Because, as I said, in our city, the mayor and the council set the policy, and it's up to then the manager and the staff under his direction to implement that. And so if you are concerned about the policies in the city of Austin, this is extremely important for you. And you need to look at your specific district to see if, in fact, you have one of the council districts that is up this time and you have somebody on the ballot, because not everyone will, since we now have the council members running from districts. So what do we have on the ballot? Well, we have District 2, which is Southeast Austin, and there are, that's what we call an open seat. There are 4 people running. You don't have an incumbent. District 4, which is North Central Austin, Greg Kazar is the incumbent running for re-election, and you have 2 opponents, Lewis Heron and Ramesis Steperver. You have District 6, which is Northwest Austin, with Jimmy Flanagan running as an incumbent, and Mackenzie Kelly, Jennifer Mustaller, and Dee Harrison. District 7, North Central Austin, you have Leslie Poole as the incumbent and Morgan Witt opposing her. And then District 10, which is Northwest Austin, and that is a crowded field. You have Allison Alter running as the incumbent, then Robert Thomas, Belinda Green, Bennett Easton, Noel Tristan, Pooja Sethi, and Jennifer Verdon, all opposing Allison Alter, who is the incumbent running in that particular seat. So it's important that you look to see which district you live in and whether you're going to have one of these council races on your ballot when you go to vote. And then really important that you inform yourself, because these are all contested races and some of them have quite a few candidates. Inform yourself about all of these candidates, of course, before you cast your ballot. It's likely that we could see, in fact, runoffs in some of these also.
So this that's for Austin, but it also pertains to many people from all across Texas, that everybody needs to go and find out what is on their ballot so that they know if they're voting for these folks at the local level. And they can do that by going to their county election website, or their county website, and look up their election and get a sample ballot. Or you could go to the League's Nonpartisan Voters Guide at vote411.org, and we'll provide you more information of that, because it is difficult to tell all those folks that are on the ballot.
That's an excellent point. I was using Austin as an example because I can't talk about every city council race. So it's important statewide for everyone to go and look at your ballot and see Who's running for county commissioner, for instance, who's running for school board, all of county commissioners are elected from districts. So you have to see that. School board is elected from districts. Your city council members who are elected from districts, your state representatives, your state senators, all of these. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Sherry. And we will move on to the county elected officials. Susan Redford is coming on next, and she is the Executive Director of the Texas Association of Counties. Before joining the Texas Association of Counties in 2015, Susan had served as an elected judge in Ector County for several years. She also previously worked as the Assistant County Attorney and Assistant District Attorney for Ector County. I do want to let you know there's 254 counties in Texas, and I'm sure Susan will elaborate on that. Of course, we can't meet the needs of every type of county out there, but Susan, let us know what your thoughts are on elected officials and how they impact our lives for voters in Texas.
All right, thank you, Grace, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. As you mentioned, Texas Association of Counties, we do represent all 254 counties, and we are an integral part of the selection process because, of course, one of the primary responsibilities of counties is to oversee and facilitate elections on the local, state, and national level. So we're glad to be here and glad to be a part of this conversation. Really, where I want to focus on today is I want to talk broadly about the county elected officials that are going to be on office. One interesting fact about county elected officials on the local level, county elected officials are the only ones that run in partisan races. So on your ballot, you will see generally in most counties, a Democratic candidate as well as a Republican candidate, if not even an independent of some form or fashion. So just an interesting fact about counties. But I want to talk first about district attorneys. The district attorneys will be the first county race that you see on your ballot. Most district attorneys in the state of Texas serve only one county. However, there are some that serve multiple counties. So that's something that you need to keep in mind, that they may not be, this particular office may not be exclusive to just your county. What does a district attorney do? They're in charge of analyzing and gathering evidence to determine if there are grounds for criminal prosecution cases within their districts and present those cases at trial. To get really more in depth on that, they represent the state in prosecuting felony criminal cases. So that's going to be anything from theft over $10,000 all the way up to capital murder. That is their responsibility. They also work with law enforcement and guide law enforcement through investigations of criminal cases. They present criminal cases or proposed criminal cases to the grand jury for the grand jury to decide whether or not that case is going to be indicted to move forward in the criminal process. And then in some counties, they represent victims of violence in protective orders. And in some counties, they also may represent the state in child protective services cases or cases where children are removed because of allegations of abuse or neglect. So that is what predominantly district attorneys do. Of course, we have a saying at the Texas Association of Counties, there are 254 counties and there are 254 ways to run a county. So they're all a little bit different, but this is just kind of a guiding, some guiding forces for you. The next county office you will see on your ballot is the office of sheriff. Sheriff is no stranger to the public. But really what I want to talk about a little bit is what is the sheriff actually charged with doing? They're the primary peace officer and conservator of the peace for the county. So in their county, they serve as a licensed peace officer. They're responsible for enforcing the criminal laws of the state. They also, and probably one of the largest duties they have, is to manage and operate their county jail. And that's the largest part of their staff, and the largest part of their budget is managing and operating the county jail. They're also charged, many people don't realize, with providing security for all county levels of county court. So generally your bailiffs and your court security officers report to the sheriff. They serve warrants and civil papers, and they also, interestingly enough, regulate bail bondsmen in counties that do not have a bail bond board. So that's for smaller counties without a bail bond board. They actually decide who can legitimately write a bail bond in that county, and who does not have the access to do that. So just an interesting fact about sheriffs. The next county office you'll see on your ballot is going to be that of a county attorney. Now, something you have to keep in mind is that the duties of county attorneys vary immensely from county to county, because many counties have what you call a criminal district attorney. That criminal district attorney will prosecute felonies and misdemeanors. Your smaller counties generally will have a district attorney and then a county attorney, in which case the county attorney will prosecute your misdemeanor cases. Most of your misdemeanors are your small level thefts, your first and second driving while intoxicated cases, possession of marijuana, cases like that. They also work with law enforcement investigations and provide what I think one of the most valuable aspects of a county attorney is that they're charged with providing advice to the commissioner's court and their other county officials. So they're kind of the branch of the county that guides your county commissioner's courts on what is legal, what is not legal, and how to proceed. And they also may represent the state in removal of children who possibly have been abused and neglected, just depending on what that county's customs and practices are. The next county office is the tax assessor collector. Tax assessor collector is charged primarily with calculating property tax rates for the county. So those calculations that you see posted generally in the months of July and August of what proposed tax rates will be, they're given the numbers by the Commissioner's Court, and they provide those calculations back to them. In most counties, the tax assessor collector actually collects property taxes for the county. In some counties, you'll see that the appraisal district does that. They do process motor vehicle titles and transfers. In many counties, they may issue boat titles and registrations. In some counties, they register voters, and in a small handful of counties, they actually conduct the election. So some of our tax assessors are involved in the election process as well. And then they collect various other state fines and fees, generally associated with the Department of Transportation, surrounding titles of trailers, cars, and things like that. The next county office is probably the one that's of most interest to people, and that's your county commissioners. So every 2 years, you have 2 members of your commissioner's court that are up for re-election. There are 4 commissioners in every county. So this time around, we're going to have commissioners for precincts 1 and precinct 3 will be on the ballot. What does a commissioner do? A lot of people think commissioners are just responsible for roads, but it's really far more than that. They sit on the commissioner's court, which is presided over by the county judge, but each commissioner is a voting member of that court. And they act to make the policy decisions and the budgetary decisions for every county. So, for instance, adopting the budget for each county, that is their responsibility. Overseeing the budget for that county, that is their responsibility. Setting the salary and benefits of every county official, including their fellow elected county officials and themselves, is part of their duties. They also then are responsible for, in most counties, for building and maintaining roads. There's some exceptions to that, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. That gets pretty detailed. So just know that you'll have 2 county commissioners on your ballot, and each one has a designated precinct. So you can only vote for the one in your precinct if your precinct is the one on the ballot. So be sure that you pay very close attention to what precinct you're in whenever you go to vote. The next office that you will see is also a precinct office in the county, and that is your Justice of the Peace. And many counties have 4 justices of the peace, but they're all variations. There are counties with 1 justice of the peace, and there are counties with up to 8 justices of the peace, just depending on the size and the needs of the county. The justice of the peace is also called a judge because they preside over a court. They preside over justice court, meaning that they hear traffic offenses. They hear Class C misdemeanor cases. An example of that would be just a general public intoxication charge, or even a possession of drug paraphernalia charge. Anything with a low level fine of that nature. They do hear civil cases up to $20,000 in controversy. And that's an increase over 2 years ago. Up to that point in time, the cap was $10,000. Now it's up to $20,000. So their jurisdiction has expanded over the past 2 years. They hear what we call landlord and tenant disputes. Most people call them eviction cases, but they're responsible for that. A lot of people don't realize justices of the peace are also in charge of hearing truancy cases for the schools that do not have a truancy court system. So most of your rural justices of peace will hear truancy cases from their school. They also perform magistration duties. So they're the ones generally that go to jail after a person's been arrested. You know, that first point of contact, going through their rights and setting the bond for the official that has been arrested and charged with a crime. And then in most counties, the justice of the peace also has the sad duty of performing inquests. If a person dies under suspicious circumstances or in unattended death, the justice of the peace has to go out and review the scene, view the body, and determine whether or not an autopsy is necessary. So just another interesting fact about your justices of the peace. And then the last one, the last county office on your ballot is the office of constable. And the duties of constable varies from rural counties to your major urban counties as far as what they do. They do have to be a licensed peace officer, and they can perform various law enforcement functions. You'll see some constables that engage in traffic enforcement. Some constables don't do that. But by constitution, they are charged with serving warrants and civil papers for the justice of the peace courts, and then also serving as a bailiff for your justice of the peace court. So those are the primary duties of the constable. You see some, like I said, that have expanded more deeply. Generally in every county, for every justice of the peace you also have a constable that matches up with that JP. There are a few variations in the state of Texas. So my best advice, just be aware of how many JPs and constables you have in your county, what precincts they report to, and then what precinct you're in, so you know who to vote for and who to be looking for on the ballot. As far as county elected officials, that's what we have for you this time around.
Thank you very much. That is so fascinating. I think it's very interesting, and each one of those officials impacts our daily lives. Hopefully not so much the constables and the peace officers so much, but you never know, and it's important to know what their duties are. Everybody needs to go, of course, to their county election website to find their sample ballot so they'll see who they'll be voting on. If you have a league in your community, then those folks will also be on vote411.org, so you can compare the candidates and make a decision as to who you want to vote for, because we all need to be prepared and we need to be able to vote for the best candidate. There is no straight party voting in this election, so everybody needs to write down who they're going to vote for, and take it to the polling place with them so that they will know exactly who they're voting for on that ballot and can do it very quickly. Thank you so much, Susan. That was fascinating. I think I learned something new both with you and Sherry so far. So let's see. Brandon Draper, you're up next. Brandon is on the board of directors for the Texas Young Lawyers Association. He is an assistant county attorney at the Harris County Attorney's Office. And before that, he served as associate judge for the city of Jacinto City Municipal Court. Did I say that right, Brandon?
Jacinto City.
Jacinto City. Thank you. And you're going to be discussing judges.
Yes, so interestingly, judges are an elected official in Texas, for the most part, that serves on a municipal level, county level, and a state level. And like all these other positions, they affect our daily lives. So we have both criminal court judges and then also civil court judges, and some judges that serve in both a criminal and civil capacity. And on these levels, they're determining issues as to whether.
Yes. Is anybody else hearing some issues with audio, or is it just me? There's some issues with the audio, so I didn't know if you wanted to try to fix that before you continued.
How about now?
Sounds good to me. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. So I'll just start over. So, judges serve in a variety of capacities, some criminal, some civil, some both, but they impact our daily lives. And they also serve in the municipal, county, and statewide level. And so on the criminal level, they decide who goes to jail for how long and for what crimes. But they also make decisions on the civil level as well, or criminal as well, but issuing warrants, whether or not someone's going to get evicted. On the more fun level, they can officiate weddings, but they do make decisions that affect our lives a little bit more than some of the other officials do, even though the other officials have some bigger picture issues that impact. Now, the important thing you want to think about as a voter when picking a judge is, can they be fair and impartial? Will they uphold the law? Do they do what the law says they're supposed to do? The American Bar Association puts out a good guide as to what they think is appropriate for a judge. And it's something you can consider as well, because with a lot of positions, you can learn a lot about the official by what political party they're attached to. But for judges, I would argue that their political affiliation has almost nothing to do with how they'll be as a judge. So things you can look for according to the ABA. Will they uphold the law? Because that's what they should do. They should be independent and impartial. They should possess the appropriate temperament and character. You want to know, do judges treat people with dignity and respect when you come to their court? Do they possess the appropriate capabilities and credentials? Do they have the confidence of the public? Are they diverse and reflective of the community? So if you have a very diverse community, your judiciary should look like your community. And finally, do they do their duties in a manner that has the support and faith of the public? Now, Texas, like I was saying, has judges on a variety of levels. And there's generally two types of courts. There's trial courts and appellate courts. And when we're talking about trial courts, it's what you essentially see on Law and Order. So you're hearing witnesses, they're evaluating evidence, you're arguing before the jury, and depending on if it's a bench trial before a judge or a jury trial that a judge oversees, but the jury is the trier of fact, the jury or judge decides the verdict of the case. And that's where you hear arguments in a case, or that's where you hear the evidence, testimony, et cetera, for a case. Appellate courts, on the other hand, there is no new evidence, there's no new witnesses. It's a different panel of judges determining whether or not the trial court made the right decision. And that'll usually happen when one of the parties thinks that the trial court was wrong. And in Texas, the breakdown is essentially you go from a trial court, you go to a mid-level appellate court. In Texas, that's the Court of Appeals, and there's 14 judicial districts in Texas. Interestingly, Houston is 2 of them. And then if the parties still disagree, if it's a criminal case, it'll go to the Court of Criminal Appeals. And if it's a civil case or a juvenile case, it'll go to the Texas Supreme Court. But even within that, there's still different types of courts. So we heard earlier about justice of the peace courts, that they handle issues on a municipal or local level, but there's also municipal courts, and that was the role I served in. Now, I actually was one of the few judges or types of judges in Texas where I was not elected. I was appointed by the city council. The city council, they were elected. So if you wanted to learn about, if you liked or didn't like how judges like us were doing, that was on you to elect a different or keep the same city council. But those municipal courts, we mostly handled Class C misdemeanors. So misdemeanors where the biggest punishment you can get was a fine. But then you have county criminal courts at law, or depending on the county, they just call it county court at law, and they'll determine misdemeanor crimes. And then you have district courts, and they'll determine the results of felony cases. Now, for civil matters, like they were saying earlier, the small claims kind of issues, they would go to JP courts. Bigger level civil issues, like multi-million-dollar lawsuits, would go to civil district courts. And then from there, if they're appealed, like I said, they would go from the Court of Appeals, or then to the Court of Criminal Appeals, or the Supreme Court. Now, the big issue is really how are you going to determine which judge you want to pick. As I was saying, I do think that political party doesn't tell you much about the judge, but there is a lot you can do to figure out if there's a certain judge you should or should not vote for. Although most of this COVID experience has been bad, one area where it's helpful is that you can now go to the court's website to view these judges in action. So you can see, are they upholding the law? Are they treating the participants with the dignity and respect they deserve? If so, you should vote for them. If not, maybe you should vote for their opponent. Another big area that most bar associations do is they'll put out polls of the judges, and these polls are sent out to the attorneys who practice in those courts, and they determine between the two candidates, who do you prefer? That's one of the polls. The other type of poll is, they ask the attorneys to judge the judges on their ability to follow the law, their ability to be impartial, their ability to treat the parties fairly, the judge's work ethic, and then overall rate the judge. And you can look at what the attorneys think who practice there. If you value, they're the ones there every day, so you can take their opinions to heart as to whether or not these judges are good or not. But that obviously is time consuming, so you can also check your local newspaper, see who your local newspaper has endorsed, and see why. On top of that, the judges typically have web pages for their candidacy. You can see if the issues that are important to them are also important to you. And finally, if your judges are actively campaigning, and they're going to either be in a Zoom campaign near you or that you can access, or they'll be in person in your neighborhood, go see them, ask them questions directly. And if you like what they have to say, it's another way that you can learn, if they're the candidate for you. But overall, these judges, they make very important decisions for your life, and the information is out there to know if they're going to be a good judge. So I would urge you to look into them and decide who you want to vote for.
Oh, thank you so much. I thought that was fascinating. And again, you could go get a sample ballot at your county election website, or go to vote411.org and compare the candidates. But I love the way you presented other ways you could find more information about judges. I think judges are, unless you're caught up in the system, most of the time we manage to stay out of the court system. So thank goodness. But it is really important to have those qualities in judges. So thank you for sharing that information. And you can find links to that on our PDF of our voter's guide that Brandon helped create some information about judges in Texas. So I really appreciate that. We're going to now hear from Monty Exter. He is with the Association of Texas Professional Educators. He's a senior lobbyist with ATPE and the largest independent educators association in the U.S. They exist to serve the needs of all public education employees in Texas and advocate for them on local, statewide, and national levels. He has a law degree from the Baylor School of Law. Monty's going to cover things that impact many different positions, and we'll find out what he's going to cover here in a second, and how they impact people's lives. Thank you so much, Monty, for being here today.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks for inviting us. So as Grace mentioned, the positions that impact public education are in some ways very broad. Public education actually finds its way all the way from the top to the bottom of the Texas ballot. Certainly, folks think about positions such as school board, which is a very important position that is education specific. But education is really determined all along the elected spectrum. So really, you can start all the way at the top of your ballot when you're thinking about education decisions. The president himself actually nominates for office the U.S. Secretary of Education. So the U.S. Department of Education makes many decisions that are going to impact you down at the local level. In addition to that, you've also got another agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that has a pretty big impact on education. So it's actually the Ag Department at the U.S. level that funds the school feeding program So if you have a student or are concerned about students that have free and reduced lunch, then many of the determinations about how that program are going to function and the funding of it are actually started at the federal level through sort of an agency you might not think of. It's through, again, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Additionally, you do have the U.S. Department of Education. They're going to be making lots of decisions, particularly around accountability and testing. But they also have lots and lots of grant funding that they oversee. And so that both of the top level positions at those departments are presidential appointees. So every time we get a new president, we tend to get new heads of both of those agencies. Excuse me. Then we come just slightly down the ballot at the federal level to the Senate. Whether it is your U.S. senators or your U.S. congressional delegation over in the House, those folks also have a large impact on public education. Somewhere between 10 and 15% of the education budget comes from the federal level, including some very important aspects such as Title I funding, which is our funding that is really dedicated towards our kiddos who are in higher risk categories, low socioeconomic kiddos, and programs that are designed to really help them. Additionally, at the federal level, you've also got the IDEA. So any child who is impacted by special education, there are federal laws in place that are going to help oversee their education. And those are going to be determined again by your senators and your congressional representatives. An additional aspect for the U.S. Senate that the House members don't share is that it is the U.S. Senate that confirms any appointee of the president. That's been in the news a lot recently because of the Supreme Court, but it is not just Supreme Court members that are confirmed by the Senate. Virtually all high-level presidential appointments have to go through a Senate confirmation process. And so, for example, Betsy DeVos, the current head of the U.S. Department of Education, was confirmed towards the beginning of her appointment. If the presidency were to turn over and we were to have a new appointee, then they would need to be confirmed. And so you can see that there's a lot going on at the federal level. Now we jump down the ballot a little bit further to our state offices. I would say that the vast majority of public education policy is actually determined at the state level. And so that is going to be at the state house, which are your state representatives and your state senators. Also, not during this particular election cycle, but that is going to also be impacted by the governor and the lieutenant governor. Now, they only run every other cycle, and we're currently on an off cycle for those particular positions. But next cycle, they will be up, and they are also crucially important. For example, when the lieutenant governor is up, the lieutenant governor gets to choose who the chairs are in the Senate, and that includes the chair of the Public Education Committee. That's going to have a very big impact on what legislation impacting public education would potentially be able to make it through the session. Additionally, when you look at the governor has the ability to veto any bill that comes through. The bills that go through the Texas legislature, if you look at all of them, by far education makes up the largest single issue area percentage of bills going through the Texas legislature. And so the governor gets to decide on every single one of those, whether or not he wants to attempt to veto that bill. Obviously, the legislature can override a veto, but that doesn't actually happen all that often. Additionally, the governor has the line item veto authority on the Texas budget. Almost 1/2 of the Texas budget is made up of Article 3. Article 3 within the Texas budget covers both higher education and K-12 education, as well as the teacher retirement system of Texas. So about half the state budget is in the article that deals exclusively with education. And the vast majority of that article is K-12 or pre-K-12 education, talking about tens of billions of dollars every year coming from the state level. and then additional tens of billions of dollars coming from the local level. So all of those folks who are on the ballot in your area that are a state rep or a state senator are very important when you are considering education policy. This particular election is also going to be particularly important because the counterpart to the lieutenant governor in the House is the Speaker of the House. Unlike the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House is not elected by the Texas electorate directly, but is indirectly so in that it is the Texas House members that elect their Speaker, who is their presiding officer. The Speaker of the Texas House appoints the chairs of the various different committees in the House, just as the lieutenant governor does in the Senate. So again, that's going to include the chair of appropriations. We've just learned how important appropriations is to school funding. That's going to include also the chairs of higher education, which is going to impact the K-12 pipeline as far as teacher preparation. And it's also going to include the chair of public education, who is going to be able to essentially determine what bills are going to make it through the House portion of the process to be considered on the House floor, again, with regard to education. And so you're looking at, again, there several hundred bills that they're going to have a determination on. So I say that that's particularly important this session. That is because right now the partisan balance of the House is extremely narrow. There have been some times where the House has been controlled by one particular party or another by a wide margin. Right now, we're in a situation where the House could easily flip from one party to the other. That almost always results in a new speaker, really regardless of which party, in this case, though, happens to come into power in this next session. You're going to get a new speaker, so you're going to get potential new appointees, and that's because the current Speaker of the House isn't rerunning. So regardless of what party we get, we're going to have a new Speaker of the House and potentially new chairs of all of those committees. So then we jump down again in levels down to the local level, and now we are at school boards. Many school boards are elected in the November election, although there are still a fair number of school boards that are elected on the May election cycle. For all of those folks that are in the November election, you have school board members that are potentially coming up. For many districts, your school board members are staggered. They usually have longer than 2-year terms. Many of them are 4-year terms so that your whole board doesn't come up all at once. Some school boards in the state have individual districts, which means that they are representing only a portion of the school district. Many school districts overlap municipal areas, but not always is that a one-to-one. School districts are their own political entities that are not directly attached to a city. So you may have, for example, in San Antonio, several school districts within just the boundaries of San Antonio itself. You may then have within Austin, where you've got AISD that not only incorporates all of Austin, but some of the extra, territory just outside of Austin that is also within AISD. So you really have to look at those. I think that, whether you go to 411 or whether you go to your county website, those are good places to see who's going to be on the ballot and begin to learn about those school board races. Then, though, you can actually even drop further down the ballot. At the very bottom of the ballot, you start to find propositions. Propositions are a really big deal whenever it comes to education and elections. Bond propositions are largely how schools fund, how ISD fund the building of their schools. So bond propositions for ISDs oftentimes can reach into the hundreds of millions of dollars. They are really big decisions for the electorate, and they are all the way at the bottom of the ballot. Again, some of these bond propositions you will find on a November ballot, and others of them you will find on the May ballot, which is why we encourage folks at ATPE to vote in every election, whether it is a primary election, a May election, a special election, a runoff election. Really, if there's an election being held, it's important that you vote in vote in it. Many of the races that I've talked about, you can certainly find information on 411, Vote 411. We are big proponents of the league's information and send folks there. Additionally, for Texas House seats, Texas Senate seats, and for the State Board of Education, which I almost forgot to mention, that's another level that comes right underneath state senator on your ballot. There is a 15-member board that oversees the curriculum writing in the state of Texas. They also get veto authority over new charter holders, and they oversee the $32 billion permanent school fund, which pays for textbooks for every student in the state of Texas. So they do have some very important functions there. They are also staggered, and they are also up in November. So SBOE members, state senators, state representatives, another place if you are looking to find out what their positions are on education is teachthevote.org. And that is a website that is run by ATPE. Though it is not branded ATPE, it is certainly not just for ATPE members. It is for anyone in the public who is interested in learning what the education positions are for all of those elected persons. You can see their answers to our education survey if they've answered it. You can also see their voting records if they are a senator or a representative. And I think that that covers education on your Texas ballot.
I think you're on mute, Grace.
Yeah, you're muted, Grace.
You're on mute, Grace.
You did a great job. Thank you so much. So one of the things that's important, the reason why everybody is involved in public education is important to everybody's lives. And so that's why it was important to have this information coming about public education. Of course, all these elected officials impact many other things besides public education, but it just is a way to make it personal for you to understand if you have a child in school, grandchildren in school, or whether you just care about your community and how they're educated. Sherry, did you want to wrap up real quick? Because I want to have some time for questions.
Very quickly, as you can see, there is a lot of variation across the state of Texas. And so it's very important to go to those guides. The League's 411 is an excellent source, but also your county clerk and some of these other resources, because things vary as far as the counties and the judges. I talked about the city council and mayor. The council manager form, which I highlighted, is the most popular form here. As I said, Houston is the outlier with having what we call the strong mayor. But in all of these, it's important to really dig down to look at your particular races and go to these guides to look at whether it's your county commissioners, your judicial, is your mayor up, are your city council members up, is your district up? And of course, what Monty mentioned with the different levels of government. I do want to add that, of course, for your state representatives and your state senators, they have domain across so many different policy areas. So it is very important to understand that your state representatives and state senators have that statewide domain over so many different policy areas, and to keep that in mind. There are lots of local issues that will, for instance, be affected by what happens in the Texas legislature. And as Monty noted, we know we will have a new speaker of the Texas House one way or the other, because our current speaker is not running for re-election. One other thing that I did want to pick up on, and that is those initiatives. You could have initiatives and down at the bottom of your ballot, whether it's for bonds or now tax rate, the TREs, the tax rate election because of SB2, right? If you're going over that limit in the revenue that you can bring in a city, that has to be on the ballot for a tax rate election. You could also have, for instance, transportation initiatives on there. So very important to look at, and I know it's exhausting, that entire ballot, but the League is here to help you, as are many other sources.
Thank you so much. I had forgotten about the taxes being on there, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. We're gonna have Dorothy Marchand with the League of Women Voters has been reviewing the questions, and if you guys have some time to stay, we're gonna try to see what question she has. Dorothy, are you on?
Yeah, yes, I am. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. There were several questions. People wanted Brandon to repeat the sources or the list of sources where they can get information on judges and qualifications so that they can write those down. And so if he could please repeat those slowly. There were also, where do you get information on a judge's temperament? So if he could just go over quickly, or not quickly, slowly so people can write it down, the different sources of information on judges.
Sure. So the first source I mentioned for what qualities you're looking for in a judge, the American Bar Association has, but I believe it's on the League of Women Voters site as well as to important aspects that a judge should feature. Then in terms of where you can find out about a judge, the first is go to the court's website. So if you know that, like just as a random example, the 40th District Court, your local district court, and that judge is up for re-election, Google that court and go to the actual government website for that court, and one of the links should have access to that day's proceedings. One of the features of our court system is that all trials and hearings are public, so you have a right to observe them even if you're not a party to them. So you can actually observe if they have the demeanor that you think is appropriate for a judge. Now, obviously, I think if you ask any candidate, do you have the right demeanor? They're probably going to say yes. But you can observe for yourself by just watching their proceedings. The other big areas that I mentioned were go to your local bar association. So for example, I'm in Houston now. The Houston Bar Association has two types of polls for judges. One about just preference. So of the two candidates, who do you like more? And that's asked by the bar asks the attorneys who practice there. So these are the people presumably who know best because they're there every day. They ask a preference poll, but then also of these 5 qualities, do you think this judge demonstrates them? So again, do the attorneys know everything? No, but they're the people that are there the most. So they're certainly a good source. Then this is judge by judge, but go to their campaign website, see what they're campaigning on, and if that aligns with your beliefs, then certainly it's a good indicator that they might be for you. And then also just go to their campaign events, whether it's in person or by video conference. And if you have the opportunity to ask them something, and like their answer, it's again a good indicator as to whether they might be the judge for you, or if they don't, then they're not. Those are the main areas. Go to their court website, go to the local bar association, check your local newspaper to see who they have endorsed, and that can really provide a lot of information about which judge is right for you.
Thank you so much. Dorothy, do you have another question?
Yes, another one for Brandon. Some things have come up in terms of, there seem to be a whole lot of judges on the ballot this time. Is it unusual, or are there a lot of judges leaving? And what judges are appointed by the governor versus running? Do you know the number that are running versus, just free elections versus appointments by the governor?
Well, for the most part, every judge should be, for these levels, like district court, county court, Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, they're all by elections. Now, obviously, the governor does appoint them from time to time. That's typically from when a judge has resigned prior to his term being finished. So, for example, when a Supreme Court justice resigned in the last couple of years, or retired, Governor Abbott appointed a new justice, and now that justice is up for re-election this year. So he completed the term and now is running this time. But in terms of, I guess it might seem like more, but typically they are staggered, so you're not replacing everyone all at once. But it's certainly, there's quite a few things on the ballot this year, judges included.
Thank you.
Okay. Grace, one of the other questions was just a clarification on the status of straight party voting. Perhaps you could address that.
There is a lawsuit, and I think it's still in the court system. So, but at this time, no changes have been made. So there will be no straight party voting at all on your ballot. But I want to let you know that there's still an R or a D or an L or a G next to anybody's name, or there could be an independent person. So it's still up to you. You will have that information. What you have to do, though, is mark in each election office. That's why it might take a little longer. So important to bring either a sample ballot or a list of the candidates you're going to vote for so that you can quickly mark them down the list all the way down to your county constable. It's very important, these elections, and if you write their names down and their position they're running for that you're going to vote for, then you will show up at the polls with what you need to vote quickly and efficiently. The main concern with no straight party voting is that people, maybe 60% of the voters used to use it, and it's a new thing that they will show up at the polls and it won't be there. And so we want to make sure everybody knows that and that they're prepared with their list, because you will have to mark all the way down the polls, all the way down to the propositions or those non-candidate things that we're voting on too at the local level. So it's just incredibly important to know what you're going to vote for when you show up at the polls.
We have a few more questions.
Monty had another comment.
Yeah, because you've mentioned a couple of times bringing your selections with you to the polls, I just want to make sure that we mention that those have to be on paper. You cannot take a smartphone out of your pocket while you're in the polling location or any electronic device. So don't put it on your phone and think you'll be able to use it, because you will then not like it when you get to the poll.
Right, thank you. And I just wanted to add, because we will not have that, kind of check the box straight party voting this time, and you cannot use your phone, go early, right? Go early so that you have the time that you need to get through, no matter where you are, what's going to be a lengthy ballot, although it's going to vary depending on where you live.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much for those reminders that are all over our website and our information, but I forgot to mention. Dorothy, it is 1 o'clock, so I think we're going to let people know that what we're going to do is look at the questions and concerns that you put in the chat or in the question group, and we'll come up with answers. I may reach out to the panelists to help me get those answers, and then we'll send that out to you after we get it prepared, along with a link to this webinar, so you could share this webinar with more people, and we can get the information out to as many people as possible about how to safely vote in this election. I'm going to leave you guys now. I'm going to share my screen and show the important election dates. So everybody go to vote411.org, compare candidates, bring a list, a written list or a printed list to the polls. Share. Boop. See if I get the right one up. Now you can see my cheat sheets. Where are you?
While you're doing that, I saw a question about different types of really municipal governance, the pros and cons of councils and being from districts or not from districts. Most nationwide, we see really the majority of the districts and city councils now are from geographic districts. Austin was one of the last holdouts, and actually Seattle, Washington after Austin. But there is information on the pros and cons of that. And there's also a lot of information on the pros and cons of having a council manager form of government, or what we call the strong mayor form. And so there are websites that I could send people to for that.
Why don't you share? Thank you so much, Sherry. That is so important. And send the links to those. And if you guys have some resources, I know Susan, you do, because we share them on our, so send us the resources. Brandon, if you just make a little bullet list of some resources, and we'll send that out to the people. We had about, Karen, am I off? Or people listening still? Or is it?
Yes, people are still listening.
Well, we will be sure and send all this information out to you so that everybody has that information, and I will send a follow-up email to each of the panelists and to the presenters. Thank you so much for being here, guys. and let me know if you have any questions.